Hi, class. Phil had a question on our discussion boards about why Titus Andronicus feels so different from the other Shakespeare plays we're reading this semester. And though Phil felt that I answered that sufficiently during our Collaborate chat, I thought I would make a kind of background video anyway to walk through some of what happens to English drama as an art form over Shakespeare's career. If Titus Andronicus feels different from the other plays, it's because it is different, that it's a younger Shakespeare, but it's also a younger art form. Shakespeare's style changes enormously over a relatively brief career, not something a little more than 2 decades long, maybe 25. This play, this play is written 10 years before Hamlet. It feels like it was written substantially more than 10 years before Hamlet. This play was written 4 or 5 or 3 years before Merchant of Venice or the Henry IV plays. Feels like an entirely different playwright, and you're not the only person who feels this way. That's a huge change in half a decade. Shakespeare is changing as an artist very rapidly. English drama is changing as an art form very rapidly. A massive change over Shakespeare's career that he changes with and helps drive. He is changing the art form and changing with it, both of those things. There are some straight-on Bardolaters who will try to give him all the credit. I don't think that's helpful, especially since the last two plays we're reading, Titus Andronicus and the the Winter's Tale, are from the beginning and end of his career, or early and late in his career, the moments when he is not the dominant figure. Titus Andronicus reads like Marlowe or Kyd in some ways, a perfectly well executed Marlovian or Kyd-like Senecan revenge tragedy. The Winter's Tale, the romances, these are Fletcherian tragicomedies. They seem influenced by the style of Shakespeare's younger collaborator, John Fletcher, who writes a kind of popular tragicomedy format. Okay, how fast can an art form change? It changes in Shakespeare's lifetime and in his working lifetime enormously, night and day. Do we have any metaphor? Do we have any analogies for this? I have 3 analogies for you. They're all from forms of American popular music from the last 120 years. My 3 analogies would be jazz, rock and roll, and hip hop. If you listen to early jazz, you find that, Dixieland from like jazz records from 1920 don't sound like jazz records from 1930. Louis Armstrong in 1922 doesn't sound like Louis Armstrong in 1932. What happened to jazz in those 10 years? Louis Armstrong happened to jazz in those 10 years. Duke Ellington happened to jazz. Newer art forms often go through a period of rapid maturation. There's a moment where you get the basic grammar down. This is what we do. And this is, oh, what's a jazz band? Well, this is, we have these horns, we have this rhythm section, we use these kinds of beats, we use these kinds of blues notes. This is our basic form. And then there's a period of rapid experimentation and maturation while artists work that out. Go over to the Rock Hall next time it's open. Go over to the Rock Hall. Look at what's going on in 1956. Look at what's going on in 1976. Little Richard and whatever's happening in 19... And Little Richard doesn't sound like Stevie Wonder, vice versa. Does not sound the same. Or whoever else we want to talk about. Listen to some rock and roll records from 1962. Listen to some rock and roll records from 1968. Those are 2 very different genres. What has happened is they have formulated, okay, early on in the 50s, like this is what rock and roll is. It's this beat, it's these chord progressions. We have this kind of basic instrumentation. We have this basic structure. And then there's a rapid period of fermentation while artists work out the possibilities of that form and set the new idiom. Last pop music analogy. Listen to hip hop from 1985. I did. Good enough for me. Well, might not be good enough for you. Listen to Run DMC. Yes? Run DMC does not sound like anything 10 years later. 1985, 1995, and 2005 are three very different moments in the history of hip hop. The difference between a hip hop song recorded in 1985 and one recorded in 2000 is bigger than the difference between recorded in 2000 and one recorded in 2020. I mean, don't believe me, just stream some things. First, there's a period where you're working out what this art form is, the basic infrastructure, how it works. Okay, we have this kind of beat, we do this, the rapping will use a trochaic beat. Hip hop is very trochaic, biggie, biggie, biggie. Trochaic is, well, as a motherfucker. And then there's a period where artists work out what one does with those basic tools, with that toolkit. Same thing happens in English drama. The professional drama that Shakespeare works in goes back decades, but I mean, the first permanent playhouse in London was built in Shakespeare's lifetime in the 1570s, in his childhood, by the father of Shakespeare's leading actor, by Papa Burbage. If you read a play from the 1570s or early 1580s, and I have, it does not seem at all like anything like Shakespeare. It seems extremely crude. Plays from the 1560s, and I'll also say this, in terms of the history of this genre, plays from the 1570s and early 1580s, when Shakespeare's 10 or 15 or 20 years old, aren't commercially viable 10 years later. You cannot sell people admission. People will not pay money to go see that 15 or 20 years later. We do have jokes about people being willing to pay hard copper pennies to see Titus 20 years, 25 years down the line. In the late 1580s, well, in Shakespeare's mid-20s, you start to get a moment where this art form gels. There's a basic sense of how it operates. Okay, we do dialogue and soliloquies. We're using an iambic pentameter beat. It's the iambic rhythm. We've got the five beats a line. We're going to rhyme. We're not going to rhyme as our main way of organizing a play. Rhyme is no longer necessary. Rhyme is a special effect you throw in. Sometimes, usually it's unrhymed. And this is how we organize. This is how we do scene shifts. There's a basic sense of this is how we do it. And you start to get the first hits that are canonical, or at least part of a popular canon. Hits that stay hits. Hits you can continue to revive, that you can revise and update and bring back. This changes the game enormously. Shakespeare is part of the generation that starts these big hits. He is not the leader of that generation. He is a talented member of the pack. He is not driving innovation in his mid-20s. Who are the big innovators? The famous credit goes to our man Christopher Marlowe. Here's Tamburlaine the Great, part 1. And here's my man Thomas Kyd, the Spanish tragedy, the kind of revenge tragedy. This is the tragedy, the revenge tragedy that gives birth to all the later revenge tragedies. Titus Andronicus is, as I said in chat, is an extremely skilled version of that. Shakespeare's not changing the game. He is, in Titus Andronicus, playing the game at a superb level, playing the game as he finds it, by the rules. Over the course of his 30s, things change dramatically this poetry gets much, much more sophisticated over a 15 or 20-year period, and then the change slows down again as change slows down with rock and roll, hip hop, jazz, where all those art forms continue to change, but but things aren't entirely different every 10 years anymore. Things have settled down. Shakespeare's drama is an entirely different ballgame, decade by decade, and around the time he retires, it's turning into something else again, and Fletcher is kind of dominating with his kind of slick, tragic comedies. And after that, you actually see the formal innovation slowing down more, that we get a kind of sense of this is what it is. It doesn't change that much. Shakespeare is one of the drivers in that middle part of his career. He is moving things along very rapidly, doing a lot of things. Part of what's happening, if you look at just the verse of Titus this week and A Winter's Tale next week, you will see the shift from a heavy shift from end stopping. Titus Andronicus, sentences end when the line ends. We're using the line as the grammatical unit as well as the verse unit. Over the course of his career, Shakespeare, and not just Shakespeare, enjams more and more. Partly because the audience has gotten used to, has internalized that iambic pentameter beat. In 1592, you got to really hit that iambic pentameter beat the way Run DMC has to really hit that rap beat to let you know it's rap. Where now, like Jay-Z, Snoop Dogg, what have you, can have a looser, freer line because the audience already understands what the basic underlying beat is. Dixieland jazz, you hit that rhythm very, very clearly and cleanly. Bebop, you can experiment. You can trust the audience knows what that bass line is, knows what you're doing in this genre, so you can do it in a looser way. You see a lot of enjambment in A Winter's Tale. Look for those periods that are in the middle of the line. One of the reasons, why does Shakespeare take the lead in the middle of his career? Partly growth, maturation, and partly he lives. And by the time he's 30, a lot of his major peers who had been extremely innovative and had been leaders in developing this art form had left the business. A few to do other things, more of them dying. Marlowe got stabbed to death when he was 29. That's the end of that career. It's a fairly short but intense and influential career. Thomas Kyd, Spanish tragedy Thomas Kyd and Christopher Marlowe shared an office. They rented a room to write in together. Writing space, you need it if you're a professional. When the police came for Marlowe, they found Kyd. And they tortured him. And Kyd died a few months after that. Robert Greene got sick and died. In a way, Shakespeare's the most talented playwright left standing in his microgeneration. And then after that, he's in dialogue with the playwrights, some very smart, innovative playwrights, who start their careers 5 or 10 years after he does, who are 5 or 10 or then 15, 20 years younger. Titus Andronicus is Shakespeare doing a superbly executed version of his fashionable peers, Marlowe and Kyd. The Winter's Tale is Shakespeare late in his career, on the verge of retiring, doing a very sophisticated take that digests and uses the influence of his influential junior partner, a younger man, John Fletcher.